Greetings, magical mavens. In this witchy April garden vlog, I invite you to join me for marvelous misadventures in gardening from the month of April. I don't know about you, but this past month has been quite intense for me and folks in my life. I'm blaming Mercury's shadow period leading up to Mercury retrograde, which started on the 20th, and the start of eclipse season. But the constant theme I've been experiencing in various areas of life is that anything that could go wrong would go wrong, but not in a way that couldn't be benefited from as a lesson. So one of the areas where I found myself challenged was in getting my seed started. So in this video, I'm inviting you to come along with me as I transform my seed starting station from a seedling graveyard into a thriving paradise after learning an absolutely crucial tip in gardening, and transform my outdoor space from a barren suburban wasteland into a luxurious nature haven. And be sure to watch until the end of the video to see the complete transformation in my seedling station. I promise you, it is so satisfying. We're also doing a deep dive into composting in this video, so if you're among the patrons and viewers who have been requesting that, this video is definitely for you. So come and learn along with me as I learn and relearn important lessons about the plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle, both literally and spiritually. And get some of my best tips based on the areas of magic and gardening where I actually am more experienced. Pour yourself a lovely cup of tea or a glass of May wine, and let's do some cottage witchery in an apartment. Greetings, magical mavens. So I am just going to give you guys a quick garden update because I have learned some lessons in the past moon cycle and a half. So I'm just chilling here in the morning. Mowgli is very active in the morning. He's a lot of fun, and then he falls asleep and sleeps for like 6 hours through the afternoon. So we are doing a little bit of gardening. I have discovered that, and I haven't discovered this because I think maybe I knew this at some point, but I didn't like take good notes or whatever. You're not supposed to start seeds in compost. I know, those of you guys who are used to gardening are like, well, duh. I just reminded myself of that because part of the reason why a lot of my things weren't growing very well in the last moon cycle is because I started everything with my homemade compost, which is apparently full of bacteria that seedlings can't handle. So most of the things died, and the things that didn't definitely seemed to have sort of stunted growth. So even though it was no longer the new moon, I decided to start a ton of seeds on the full moon last week. Yeah, I started everything over, and things are starting to grow already, and they all look a lot better. So let's have a look. All right, so this is a whole new setup here. There's very few things in here that are still the original ones that I showed you guys in the last vlog. A lot of these haven't started yet because, like I said, it's been about a week, but a lot of things have. My trusty beets, man. The other beet plant that I planted in the compost did survive. It's not doing so well, but it's alive. Beets are hard to kill, apparently. We also have a tomato starting here. This was from the last batch. I tried to like replant it into cocoa coir, but it's not gonna make it. So let's go ahead and compost that. Bell pepper, this one again, I transplanted this one from the compost into the cocoa coir, and it was looking all right for a while, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and start the pepper over. The pepper is one of the few things that I didn't reseed because it was looking okay last week, but nah. Let's see, what else have we got? Okay, so this is exciting. This back here is a potato start, so I'm really excited to see if I can grow potatoes. That is some lettuce that actually did survive, and I haven't transplanted it, so we'll see what that one does. That one, what is that? Because that one I tried to transplant and it didn't make it. Wildflowers, yeah, even the wildflowers don't seem to want to be in compost. They started to grow pretty well, but then they died. The sunflower didn't even make it out of the soil last time, so that one prefers cocoa coir, obviously. The radish, again, was looking okay until like 2 days ago. This one I tried to sort of transplant, so we're gonna start this one over as well. This is just my propagated grocery store rosemary. We'll see how that does, but it did have some nice roots on there. Put that right into some coco coir. Here is yet another attempt at arugula. This time I'm using both of the lessons that I learned. So this one is in coco coir, not compost. It is in a not draining container. I'm just watering it sparingly, and it is a container that I could put a clear lid on because I've realized that arugula seedlings desperately need moisture, like way more than any of the other ones it seems like. So we'll see how that one does. These cucumbers are like ready to party. I'm probably gonna repot some of these today. That was like, I think it's been like 5 days, so that's pretty awesome. We've got some peas starting. That's really exciting. These peas actually really look like they're ready to party. There's some okra back there. The okra died last time. So yeah, learning some lessons here, guys. Learning some lessons. These back here, actually, okay, so this is an exception. So this one right here, these are wildflowers that I actually planted in the compost before. And the tube is pretty moldy, but they are doing all right. They've been doing all right the whole time. So maybe something about it being in a toilet paper roll instead of in a container that's more likely to hold on to too much moisture, I guess. That one has survived, but I have started some more just in case. We got some lettuce going back here, and this I'm so excited about. I have always wanted to grow my own black-eyed Susans from seed. I've never gotten too far with it before, so it's really exciting to see that those are starting out. And over here on the windowsill, here are those beets that were in compost. They are still in compost. I've kind of put some coco coir over the top so that the top level is a little bit more sterile for them. But they're not doing great, but they are definitely alive and continuing to grow. So like I said, if you have a black thumb, try growing beets. Sorry, I'm distracted because I'm looking out the window at a huge crow. I don't know if that's a raven. Anyway, I love birds so much. This is some spinach that this was an old one that didn't really make it, so I started some new ones in the same thing. I think this one is still kind of experimental because I think there's compost at the bottom, but I put a lot of coco coir at the top, so we'll see how that goes. This is a spinach that actually survived from the initial planting, so yay for that guy, but it had siblings that didn't make it. Here is some dill. Again, this one is from the original planting, and it's been trying to do it. It keeps forming new leaves, and the old ones keep drying out. I don't know if that's because it's in compost or because the heater is right down there, so it's kind of dry, but I have started some more of that in a different setup just in case. And I'm actually about to put the other hyacinth bulb outside. I've buried it higher up like I said I was going to because that one totally died back. This one's taking longer, and I don't know if it's because it's above the soil that it's kind of hanging on to its leaves longer, but I'm just gonna see what happens with that one. And over where the other one was, I have replaced it with this countertop tomato plant that my sister gave me from the grocery store, and I have attempted to propagate the pieces of this that were falling off when I got it. I don't know how well the propagation pieces are going to go. I'll show you those in a second. They're in the kitchen, but I did save some seeds out of one of the ripest of the tomatoes because it would be cool to be able to also grow a variety of tomato that can be grown on a windowsill. So we'll see how that goes, and I have started some of these. I've just dried these out so I can put them in one of my seed packets for later. Oh, and while we're back over here, look at that. That is some oregano. The oregano did not come up last time at all. And there's also some catnip in here. So we'll see if this guy attacks this at some point. I have no idea what's gonna happen. I've never had fresh catnip around my cat before. There's even a carrot coming up in there, so that's exciting. There's the new dill coming up. So yeah, good things are happening, guys. This is my little pile of doom over here. I'm getting ready to take this out and just compost it, but this is a bunch of stuff that I tried to kind of carry over from the last attempt. Like this one had compost in the bottom, and I put coco coir over the top to see if that would help. I don't think that's gonna grow. And these ones are just completely moldy and stuff, so you live and you learn. And over here on the kitchen windowsill, this is a little bit of that wild onion that I got from the park that I showed in my recent video. I wasn't actually able to pull that out from the root, and I didn't have a tool with me, but this was a little patch of it that did have a little bit of roots on it. So I first stuck it in water for a few days to kind of get those roots developing again, which they did very quickly, and then I just put them in some coco coir. This is the one from last year. Remember I was saying I wasn't sure if this was going to make it? It has started to grow 2 new onions, and if there's 2, if the rest of them are not already coming on the way, then these ones will multiply, because like I said, these things really do multiply. And here are those grocery store lettuces. This one grew some roots and I put it in coco coir. These ones are still working on their roots. They're going a lot more slowly for some reason, and some of them seem to actually be growing new plants on them instead of roots. So we'll see how those go. I know this one I noticed had some roots this morning. And I have propagated some grocery store sage. These looked really sad the first couple of days, but I'm seeing that they're starting to get stronger. No roots yet though. And here's a piece that broke off of the tomato. I feel like I heard a long time ago that you can propagate pieces of tomato plant, but I don't know if there's like a special part of it that's supposed to be propagated, so that's totally just an experiment. I should really look that up. And of course, our grocery store scallions are doing great as always. Well, according to the weather report, it's not going to get below freezing at night anymore, so that's just some moss from my project that I did on this table recently. Don't worry about that. But this is our hyacinth bulb, so let's bring this out. Yeah, on the whole lunar gardening thing, I feel like this is just like with any and all witchy tips. Only use it to the point where it's useful, right? Because I'm at a point where we're getting pretty far into the spring. I have a pretty short growing season in my overall environment, and an even shorter, not a shorter growing season per se, but there's less growing that my plants get to do since they get less sunlight with the awning. So they're not going to get as big as if they were in full sunlight anyway. So it would not be useful for me to wait all the way until the next new moon to start starting more seedlings if my seedlings failed. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's a fun experiment to see if things do grow better when they're planted in the lunar recommendation. But at the end of the day, they're still going to grow if you plant them in the wrong lunar phase, and not everyone does it that way. So I feel like that's kind of a metaphor for anything in the witchy and spiritual path. You know, it's kind of just like with your astrology or your human design. Sometimes it'll resonate with you and sometimes it'll seem like it doesn't, and that's okay. My astrologer friend Neha said, what did she say? She said that the chart is the map, not the territory. It's attempting to describe something, but you can only really go to that place to really experience what it's like. And it might be different now than it was when the map was made. When we got our charts, when we were born, they were just kind of hinting at what our lives might entail. But through our free will, we are creating our own version of that using the tools that we were given. And it's the same thing with all of the witchy tips. It's like, yeah, this is a cool tip. It can help you in some way, shape, or form, but the way that it helps you now might not be the same way that it helps you later. It might or might not be useful to you right now based on your circumstances. So it's all just about using your intuition. And my intuition is telling me that I just need to get my seeds started. So here we go. Hey there, it's Editing Afira here. And I just wanted to come back in and circle back around to that thing about propagating tomatoes. So you might have noticed in that flask I had a tomato leaf, and I also had a tomato stem with a leaf on it. The leaf did not propagate, it just rotted, but the one that was a stem and a leaf did start growing some roots, so you'll see me potting that up in a future video. So another thing that I've learned since filming this, you might have just noticed that I planted yet another round of the milkweed that my sister harvested from the wilds last year to help the butterflies. And since making this video, she has actually told me that they might need stratification. I think that's what it's called when you put it in the fridge or the freezer for a while to give it a sort of mock winter. So I'm gonna do some additional research on that, but just so you know, it has been weeks and weeks and that milkweed is not growing. If you have any tips on milkweed, please do let me know, because even the milkweed that I planted outside in a pot and left out over winter still doesn't seem to be doing anything, but we will see. Good morning, friends. So I just realized that it's time to start watering my outdoor garden. It's pretty mundane, but it's also magical. So for the first time this year, I'm going to be grabbing that watering can, which has been sitting there ever since last fall, and we're going to water the outdoor containers together. So I actually realized that it might be a good idea to save some of these dried mums because they might have viable seeds. So I'm gonna actually start some of these. I'm really curious to see if they grow. And honestly, I'm curious to see if the ones that were outside survived the winter. So wish me luck. Another thing that I'm gonna be doing shortly is attempting to propagate a lot more grocery store herbs. So sorry, I'm just gonna close that. By the way, just a heads up for these videos with gardening. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna be able to talk to you guys about what I'm doing while I'm out there because it is just too effing loud out there. It just can't be helped. The last time I tried to do that, I regretted it because you guys could barely hear me. So while you're looking at these lovely herbs, while I was out there, I was doing a little bit of garden witchcraft. Every time that I'm handling water, I like to repeat in my mind one of my mantras. And currently, I've been frequently reciting a mantra that involves embodying my true nature as a goddess of abundance and nature. And so I kind of was just doing a little magic with that water as I was pouring it and giving a blessing to my garden to manifest that abundant energy as within, so without. Because this year I want to have a really abundant garden, even in the less than ideal circumstances that we're working with. This is actually some parsley. I don't know if parsley is propagatable, so I'm gonna look that up on YouTube so I don't like rot all of this parsley. But I know that thyme, and I think this is marjoram, which I'm not too familiar with, but it seems to look a lot like thyme, so I have a feeling it's gonna grow similar to thyme. These can definitely be propagated in water, but I'm gonna try something different this time. I'm gonna also try propagating some of these in some sterile cocoa coir. And also, while I was out there, I was strongly considering watering the compost for the first time this year, but I resisted that urge because it's really nice out today and the weather report says it's going to be even nicer tomorrow. So I think when I have some time tomorrow, I'm going to actually sift through the old compost bin and kind of see what's going on in there and kind of assess the situation. And I don't want it to be soaking wet when I do that. So stay tuned for that. So guys, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm not sure if these are actually seeds or if these flowers were not like developed enough. I don't think I see anything that really looks like seeds in here. But one thing I did notice to my pleasant surprise is that these smell so good. And like even just the stems, when I was breaking them up into my, by the way, that was my natural mulch container, it smelled so good. It kind of smells like lavender actually, which is really nice. But now that I'm thinking about it, actually, I did save fresher versions of these flowers at the end of last year. So let me look at those and see if those have something that really looks like seeds. All right, moment of truth. Do we have seeds? I don't know. Maybe? I don't know if those are seeds or just petals. I'm not too sure. I might need to learn more about these on YouTube or something, but they do smell really good. I didn't know that about mums. Another thing that I've been looking into and experimenting with is growing berries from grocery store fruit. So, something I learned in the past month is that one of the reasons this wasn't working for me in the past is because fruit that is imported from other countries gets zapped or something, and then the seeds are no longer viable. So, I've been looking at the grocery store for organic fruits that were grown in the US. So I'm experimenting with this. So far, nothing, but if anything happens, you will find out about it in the next video. Good morning, magical mavens. We are having a very Mercury retrograde or just very shadowy shadow period. I don't know if it's actually crossed over into retrograde yet, but it has been a really weird week. Like, not necessarily bad, but the theme has been everything is going to go wrong and I'm just going to be cool about it because I'm going to look at the bright side of it, and nothing too bad has happened, just like everything has been really, really, really inconvenient. Not going to go into the details because I've woken up this weekend morning and I've decided that despite the things that are not working in here, we are going to do some magical crafting, starting with turning over the compost for real. So as you guys know, I can't actually talk to you outside because it's just too loud, but this is the old compost that's been going since last fall, or there's stuff in there from like last summer as well. But the last time that I literally sifted through it and separated the things that had biodegraded from the things that hadn't was last fall, probably in October or November. This is just soil, so some soil that has come out of the compost, so there's compost in there, and then, you know, just a mix of whatever else my potting soil has been. This is kind of where I recycle my soil into and put nutrients back into it by adding compost into it when compost is ready. This is a new compost that I just started a couple of weeks ago because there's no more room in that one and I wasn't ready to sift through that one. Ideally, I would probably not like there to be 3 buckets. I might want to get it back down to 2 if possible, but if not, that's fine. So yeah, let's go outside and sift through that. right, so to explain what we just did, because that might not have made sense. So this was the new sort of temporary compost. I just wanted to go in there and get all of the solids back out of it and put them into the old compost just to start this process fresh. So the intention here now is going to be, and oh my gosh, I think, am I gonna need another bucket? No, we're gonna keep this to 3 buckets. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna start sifting through the old compost, and we're gonna need another bucket. So I'm gonna grab another bucket, put it over there. So the other bucket is simply because this bucket of soil, like usable soil, is way too full now. I think what I'm gonna ultimately end up doing is, I wasn't gonna like dig that up, but I think I am, just enough to take the mulch off of the top and fill that up a little bit more. Because I remember thinking last year that could have been full more. I'm probably gonna do the same thing to those as well. But anyway, we've got more soil than we need right now. So we need another bucket just to take whatever soil, and by soil, I mean decomposed compost that's like textured like that. So we're gonna take all the solids out of that, put the solids into another bucket, and then we're gonna use this sifty thingy that me and my partner made. Well, he made it and I painted it. We're gonna use this to get the solids out. We're gonna put them over there, and then all of the not solids will just fall down into there, and that'll become the usable compost bucket. I hope that made sense. I feel like I was talking in circles because I didn't actually know what I was trying to say. Trying to figure out how many buckets I was gonna need, but there we go. And by the way, if you guys were wondering, in the previous video where we composted the guts of the pumpkin, actually, we did end up getting some volunteer pumpkin seeds. If you're not a gardener, volunteer plant just means you unintentionally planted something and it volunteered to grow in a random spot. It often happens in compost bins, actually. And I used to rejoice in things like that when I had a yard and an actual compost pile. I actually got a total volunteer pumpkin out of my compost one time, and it was really fun. Here, unfortunately, we can't really have volunteer plants growing out of the compost bucket because it's just not practical space-wise and whatnot. So we are gonna try and keep that to a minimum here. And by the way, for those of you guys who requested to sort of learn how to compost with me, yes, I am kind of a novice, but I do also have experience with multiple forms of composting from just years of random hood rat experimentation, basically. And so I can tell you from experience that if you're kind of grossed out by how up close and personal I am with this biodegrading food garbage, basically, first of all, if you're doing it right, it won't be stinky or slimy, which so far so good. It actually smells really nice right now, and it kind of just has like an earthy dirt kind of smell. And yeah, you don't actually have to be this up and close and personal with the sifting of the compost process in other circumstances. So for example, there are actual contraptions that will turn your compost for you. Will kind of churn it up and it'll sift it out for you. I don't have one of those. I would kind of like to see if I can get one of those that will fit on my porch this year, because that would be nice. But I do find this really therapeutic anyway, so we'll see. There's also just a yard compost pile, and you do kind of take a rake and dig through it sometimes, but you don't have to be like sifting it the way that I am necessarily. The reason why I have this set up is because of where I'm at. This situation has kind of forced me to be very up close and personal with certain elements that I might take for granted otherwise. In my desire to return to nature as much as possible in a really kind of unnaturey environment, I can't really be super selective about how I compost. I have to just compost however I'm able to in the situation. And so in order to keep this sort of tidy and down to just a few smallish buckets and whatnot, I do have to get up close and personal and see, again, everything that has and hasn't been decomposed. And in a sort of full circle moment, it does make sense. Years and years ago, when I had just a compost pile that I didn't have to be as up close and personal with, I knew that what I enjoyed about it was getting to see that complete cycle of nature happening. and I committed to continuing to do it regardless of my circumstances. So now my commitment is showing me like how committed I am. I feel like I'm rambling, but anyway, let's get back to it. Those of you guys who have gardened and composted, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's just so weird and magical and gross, and it kind of connects you to the upper world and the lower world at the same time, the world of life and death and growth and decomposition and blah, blah, blah. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get to this because it's probably gonna take a while, and it's supposed to storm soon, which I'm kind of looking forward to because it's actually pretty hot, but okay. No more procrastinating. Let's do it. All right, guys, time to break for discussion. I'm like sweating. So some thoughts as we're going along here. First of all, this is such a workout. Like, I do not work out. I just do magical shit. And in this time of year, sometimes my workout is doing the compost. So there's that. Another thought that came into my mind to kind of complete what I think I was trying to say earlier is that yeah, I've got to be really up close and personal with the decomposition process. And I think, because it's me and I try to make sense out of everything, I think the reason that I've sort of manifested this situation is because if I had just stayed in the suburbs with a large yard, it would be really easy to just be the magical green witch that I want to be without having to really think about it and create a breadcrumb trail. I think that I manifested this situation that is like way more city-like than what I actually want at this point in my life and way too sort of restricted. It's because so many people live in these apartment type environments where there's too many rules, too many like sterile rules, too much not being close to nature, all of that. And so many of us have the heart of a magical green witch type person. And maybe it's my job right now to like use my defined willpower that I have in my human design. It's this rare trait where you just keep trying when you're determined to do something and you just don't give up, no matter how much discouragement you run into, sometimes for better or for worse. But anyway, that's me. And through this determination and my affinity for making videos, maybe this next little chapter here is to like really understand up close and personal how things like gardening and composting work in really not ideal circumstances. Because if I can master it in really far from ideal circumstances, then I'll obviously be really good at it when I have more space. But then I will also understand the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical aspects of it in a much more concise way, which I think will help me to teach others as well as to just be better at it later. So anyway, just these are the kinds of things that go through my mind when I'm sifting through compost. Getting back to the actual physical aspect of it, part of the reason I'm doing this right now is to assess how I did, because this past like whole year, or maybe a little bit over a year now, is my first time really testing this particular style of composting here. It's kind of a mix between like apartment style composting and garden style composting, since I do actually have a reasonably sized outdoor space. Obviously, I could not have buckets like this inside the house. You may have seen there were a few flies buzzing around me. So let's address the pests. If you're doing composting properly, there shouldn't really be pests. And I'm not going to count these flies as pests. I'm just going to count them as friends, friendly reminders to make sure that I'm doing this correctly. So in the year or so that I've been doing this, I have never gotten maggots in the compost. If you get maggots in your compost, you're definitely doing something wrong, because that is the exact opposite of what you want. Now, if you are composting like on the ground, you will get worms. You want worms. Worms are your friends. And as I was going through this, I was like, man, my life would be so much easier if I was on the ground and I had worm friends to help me do most of this work for me, right? But I don't. And the reason why I haven't gotten worms to put in it, because I know some people do vermicomposting, which just means wormy composting. The reason I haven't done that is A, because I've heard it said that vermicomposting is basically like taking on 1,000 new pets that are now your responsibility for their health and well-being, and that intimidates me a little bit because I feel really bad. In fact, I did kill some worms by mistake. Last year, when I harvested the wild onions from the park, it didn't seem like there were any worms in that clump of soil, but apparently there were like worm eggs in it or something, because we did end up with worms in that pot. And then that pot, I think some of the soil from that pot was like too thick to really be in a pot. So I actually just put all of that into the compost and I repotted some of the onions into like an actual potting mix, right? So that's how we still have some onions. But I was like, oh yeah, this will be great. I'll just start vermicomposting with these worms. And they did multiply quite a bit. And then I noticed one time a few weeks later when I went to turn the compost, they were just gone. And I've never seen them since. So I guess they didn't survive, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm not convinced that vermicomposting is the answer for me right now. That being said though, something does need to be done differently. Overall, I think I've done a pretty good job. Like I said, the flies that are sort of hovering around it, they're attracted to the fact that deep down in that blue container at the very bottom layer, there is unfortunately a slimy, stinky layer, which means that there's not enough drainage down there. So if you were on the ground doing normal composting, the soil would absorb, like, you know, ecosystem would happen, and there would be natural drainage, and there would also be worms sort of moving everything around and creating oxygen holes, because that's what you need down there. If it's stinky, you need oxygen, and it's wet down there, which means that even though I haven't been watering this compost, the natural water from the snow and the rain and stuff that has managed to get to it is pooling at the bottom, and I don't want that. So in the winter, like after the big storm melted, I did realize that that was full of water. And so I took a drill and I put a hole about 1.5 inches from the bottom, because that was the closest I could sort of get to the bottom. And so it's not full of water, but there is that sort of 1.5 inches at the bottom that is full of water. In the ideal situation, I would actually have this elevated. There would be holes all in the bottom, and there would be something there to catch the compost tea, like the juice that would come down. And compost tea can actually be used as fertilizer. I'm not going to be able to do this right now, but I'm noting this so that me and my partner can kind of get a little bit more crafty and maybe come up with a system that does that. For right now, what I'm going to do is I am going to put, first of all, some paper into that compost, because again, if you're getting slimy and stinky, it means that you need, I think what's called brown matter is like dry leaves and paper, whereas green matter is like stuff that's more so still has life and water in it and stuff like that, like the kitchen scraps and garden scraps. So I'm going to start by mixing some paper into it. I'm also not going to pile anything on top of it just yet. I'm going to kind of let it air out. And I'm also going to put some more holes around it so that that part can just start getting oxygenated or whatever. So what I'm going to do with this bucket that now has all of the partially decomposed solid matter is I'm going to, first of all, churn it up a little bit more. I'm going to add some more paper into it because, like I said, this layer that came from the bottom is kind of just too wet and nasty. And then I'm gonna mix it all up with paper, and then I'm actually just gonna put a layer of that more sort of dry, sterile soil over the top of it. And that's how we prevent pests. So this little fly that's flying around here, he wants at it, but he doesn't really know what he's looking for. You know, like there isn't just one rotting object in there that's really gonna have the nutrients and the nastiness that he's looking for, but there is a general sort of smell, like not strong enough that my neighbors can probably smell it, but when I'm right over it, it's like, oh yeah, it's kind of stinky down there. And I'm sure a fly can smell the same thing on some of that. So we're just gonna cover it up, and that's how they be like, is there something in there I want? I think there is, but I don't know what it is and I can't get to it. And that's what you want. You know, ideally you don't want flies buzzing around it. If you do, it probably means there's something that you need to do to kind of air it out and make it not stinky. So that's gonna be our next step. And then what's in there now is now usable compost. So I'm probably gonna let that dry out a bit, and I'm probably not gonna use it to plant anything like just in that. I would mix it with some of that to kind of add the nutrients and the sort of more aerated soil together. So yeah, have I mentioned that I kind of don't really know what I'm doing? I have. But we're gonna do this anyway because we're learning together. This is why I've never done like how to compost 101 videos before, because like I don't really know what I'm doing, but I've experimented enough and done enough research and sort of seen various ways that other people have tried it that I kind of have a pretty good idea, and I get better with time. I'm gonna consider this whole thing a success, even though there were some lessons that I needed to learn with this. Overall, it doesn't stink and it's decomposed. Like we got quite a bit of actual compost out of that. And yeah, I think for the situation, this works. So another thing that I noticed was that there was a crab claw in there. Shells of seafood does not decompose, and that was one mistake that I know I made. I'm talking quietly because there's someone in the hall. We'll get to that in a minute too, about privacy. But yeah, last year my partner made crab legs and there was some leftover flesh in the shells or whatever, and I tried to compost that. Bad idea. It stinks and it doesn't really decompose very well. So there's that. Now, as far as privacy goes, composting in an apartment building, you might actually live somewhere where composting is encouraged. Like I've heard that there are some apartment buildings in Canada where composting is actually encouraged and supported, which is freaking awesome. If you don't, you can still find a way to do it. What I consider the worst case scenario, for me personally, because I like being involved in the composting, right? But for some people, you would just store your compost in a freezer bag or in a bucket, kind of like my kitchen bucket, and then you would just take it to somewhere like a farmer's market or any local place that collects compost. So years ago, that was actually what I did. There was a container in the nature preserve in my city where you could throw your compost in there, and I would do that every week or two. And I mean, it was kind of not great for the environment because I had to use my car in order to drive to it. So it kind of like, I don't think it cancels itself out. I don't really know how all that works with like calculating your carbon footprint or whatever, but I like to be involved in the composting process when I can, and I like to not make it something that I have to use more resources in order to do. So, but yeah, if that's your situation and that's the best you can do and you don't necessarily want to be doing all of this, you can absolutely still compost in that way. But as far as here, do the owners of the property and the neighbors know that I'm composting? Hopefully not, and no one has said anything. So it's kind of a like, they don't know and they don't need to know. And that kind of goes back to sort of my rules for making sure that I'm composting correctly. Because in my mind, if I'm composting correctly, they won't know and they won't need to know. It won't be attracting pests, it won't be smelly, and it won't be making a mess, right? I don't think anyone knows. And like the people who own the property do not know that I'm composting. If the few times that someone has had to enter the apartment to do like maintenance or a check of any kind, at the end of the day, when I'm done with this, it just looks like buckets of garden soil because like I said, I do put a layer of garden soil over the top of it anyway. It doesn't smell, it's not attracting bugs, it just looks like soil. And if the neighbors know, like, they don't seem to care. So yeah, it's kind of a system of checks and balances. Would I like a lot more freedom to experiment and get really crazy with it and make mistakes? Abso-freaking-lutely. But since I'm in this confined, restricted situation, it kind of just puts me on my best game of like, how can I make this happen anyway? How can I figure out how to do this correctly? And in a way that I can share with other people who do live in apartments so that hopefully they can do it too and maybe avoid some of the mistakes that I've made. So that's kind of what I do. I'm an Aquarius, and I put myself out on a limb to experiment and create better systems that support people and support the environment more, even if it kind of means that like I'm putting myself at risk a little bit. But at the end of the day, I have not had any problems, so that's my thoughts on that. So moving on to paper. I wish that I could be using a lot more leaves. When I first started composting, like in an actual garden, I was using a lot of leaves, but I don't really get leaves up here, and it'd probably be kind of weird if I went out and collected leaves just to put in my compost. So what do? I recycle paper. And this is another one of those full circle moments because one of the things I've been working on this week is my taxes. For those of y'all who are self-employed, you know what I'm talking about here. And these are just some papers and stuff that, first of all, represent a problem that I was having with the IRS that has now been resolved in my favor, thankfully. That was driving me nuts for a whole year. And so I've saved the parts of it on the computer that I need as documentation, and the rest of it I'm gonna friggin' compost because there's something so cathartic about taking the like muggle-ass problems that you have and just giving them back to Mother Earth to be not only neutralized, but turned into something that's useful to you and your environment. And I don't own a paper shredder, so if there's like really sensitive information like that, it is the perfect thing to compost. So I'm gonna be ripping that shizzle up and throwing it in the compost. Oh, heck yeah. Now I did pull these things out of the recycle bin to show you. So this is like a thing from a 6-pack of drinks. This is not something you can compost. In fact, some places you can't even recycle this because this sheen that it has over it is unfortunately plastic. And you don't want that, first of all, being in your compost if you're gonna be planting fruits and vegetables, because you don't want to be putting toxins into the areas, the soil that you're going to be growing your plants in. But also it probably won't really decompose very well, unfortunately. So you do want to avoid that. But there was a piece of that ripped off that didn't have any of that on it. So like you can use this, but you can't use that. Cardboard like this is good. But again, you want to make sure you're really cutting this up. Like this is really thick cardboard. This is thick enough that I used it for a project. Hello, Mr. Mo. He loves paper. He loves it so much. Yeah, so you definitely want to break this up because it'll take absolutely forever to decompose otherwise. So I'm going to bring some scissors out there and cut this up. All right, so some of my neighbors are standing directly in front of the building talking, and it looks like they will be for a while. So like that would be a situation where maybe I would take a little bit of a break because again, even though I'm not too concerned with it, I unfortunately don't have a good relationship with one of those people who's out there right now. And so I don't necessarily want to draw attention to the fact that I'm doing something that might be considered questionable. So I am going to take a break for now. But generally speaking, I don't think people really even know what composting is, which is unfortunate, but it also kind of benefits me in this situation where I'm sort of doing it secretively. Like there is a family down and to the side of me that clearly gardens, so they might know what composting is. They don't seem to care. I don't have it set up in a way that it should be bothering them. And then other people, I don't know if they even know. It might just look like I'm digging through soil for some stupid reason, right? Like obviously I have a garden. People are just like, oh, it's a person gardening. So I don't know, guys. What do you think based on the fact that you've now seen what I'm doing. Also keeping in mind I'm on the second floor and you can't actually really see what's going on up here. You can't like look down into it. It just looks like I'm digging through buckets. Would you find it suspicious? Do people compost in your apartment building? Like, what is your experience with composting? I know some people have literally never heard of it. And then I know some people kind of know what it is, but don't really know what goes into it. And then there are those of you guys like me who are kind of experienced. So I would love to know what your experience level is and what have you tried? What have you not tried? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Just like, what are your thoughts on this? Because I'm still figuring it out clearly. Anyway, in the meantime, I am going to show you guys what's going on with the seedlings, and I'm going to actually repot some stuff. Feast your eyes on this. So those of you guys who saw my blog from the very, very, very beginning of spring, these look very different, and that is because I learned a lot of lessons. I went from what looked like a sad little wasteland of containers to this thriving collection of seedlings. I'm gonna go ahead and repot these zucchinis. But can we just take a moment to appreciate this bean? Like, I've never grown beans before. This thing literally just came, it sprung up out of the ground as like a giant thing. Like that one's doing it right now. It's just like a giant thing coming up out of the soil. It emerges with these two bean-like things on it. And then I guess these are like the solar panels, or I don't know if those beans are the solar panels. I've never seen a vegetable come up with both solar panels and something that looks like the fruit. Like, I have never seen that before. I thought it would be more like pea shoots. Pea shoots are just leaves, and then they start to vine and they start grabbing onto stuff with their little tentacle-y thingies like that. But this looks like it's gonna be a whole crazy thing, and I am very excited to see what it does. This all happened over the course of like a couple of days, by the way. So like it looked like nothing was happening for a few days, and then all of a sudden stuff started happening. So very excited about that. This cucumber just got one of its first true leaf. That just popped up almost overnight, I think, or sometime yesterday. The cucumbers are ready to partay. And what is that back there? Whatever that is. What is that? I think that's a mini pumpkin plant. That's ready to party. I'm probably gonna need to give those guys their own rooms shortly. But these guys are at the age where it is time for them to get their own bedrooms. You guys, so I was just going to repot these seedlings really quick, and I realized that I'm out of coco coir, which means we have a new task. So I keep my mixed coco coir in here. So the reason we're using coco coir, so normally you're told that you should obviously not use garden soil, and apparently not garden compost either, as we learned, to start seedlings. And originally I thought the reason for that was just because they need like a looser soil mix, and the actual garden soil and compost is potentially too much, gonna weigh them down or whatever. Apparently also with compost and potentially garden soil, there's bacteria in it that young seedlings can't handle until they're older. So I was like giving my babies whiskey instead of milk. So there's that. But I'm also using coco coir here because it's a loose sterile mix, and it's not peat moss. So there's like a whole battle about peat moss right now because the way it was traditionally harvested was really bad for the earth. A lot of people are switching to coco coir because it literally just comes out of coconuts and it's supposed to be so much better. But I have heard that there are places where you can actually get peat moss where it isn't bad. So like, do your research or whatever. Don't know anything about it. I just went right for the coco coir since it was in question. So I had some that was loose and came from the pet store, and you just have to hydrate it because when it comes out it's like bone dry. Don't try to use it without moistening it first, just trust me. But my first experience with coco coir was actually last year when I had a brick of it from the hardware store, and that was a whole crazy thing that I thought I probably wouldn't do again living here, just because I only needed that much to fill up my garden bed. I think we are actually going to be making a second garden bed this year though, so hang tight for that. But either way, I did end up with another brick of that because my brother had some that he was using for a composting toilet in his van renovations, but he found apparently a much better way to create toilets for his vans, and so he gave me a brick of coco coir. And the way to hydrate that is to go back outside. It's big, oh my gosh, it's so heavy. I can't even pick that up with one hand. Hold on. So this crazy thing is literally like a solid brick of coco coir, and this is gonna swell to like, I don't know how many times its original size, so I'm gonna have to find like a big tote or something. I actually kind of preferred the one from the especially for starting seeds before before you're like able to get outside for the season. I would definitely recommend getting the kind that's loose because this is a whole job, but it's kind of fun, so let's do it. All right, so we're kind of running in circles here, but I don't actually have enough buckets to even hydrate this coco coir right now because so many of my totes are being used in the composting process, and ultimately I would like to get one of those buckets back, and there are some flies buzzing around and I do want to deal with the compost as soon as possible. There's some room out there now, people wise, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna drill some more holes really quickly in that blue bucket. I'm gonna put a layer of paper, a whole like lasagna style composting layer of paper over that bottom nasty bit there. And then I'm gonna start stacking the other hard bits that are in the separate container back into there. Again, sort of lasagnaing it with paper, and then we're gonna put a little bit of paper and soil on the top. So let's jump back into time-lapse mode. We're gonna get this done and then we'll have a bucket free. that turned into a very long and physically strenuous day, along with all of the mentally strenuous stuff that was going on, including the fact that our water wasn't really working over the weekend due to some kind of construction accident. You might have noticed my water stream really sucked. I decided to make myself some nice May wine and just sit down and have a little read. So you may have heard in one of my recent videos that I was featured again in Starlight Magazine, which used to only be available to paying members of my friend Tanae Stewart's Starlight Coven, but she has just gone public with it for the spring issue. So if you would like to check out my article on everything that I've learned in the past several years from both manifesting and doing the plant tend harvest compost cycle in the literal sense with gardening, along with tons of other amazing articles from Tanae and other people in our witchy community, I highly recommend this magazine. It is so relaxing to just sit down and read some articles. It doesn't feel as intimidating as cracking open a whole book, but you're gonna walk away from it feeling extra witchy and like you've either learned something or like you want to revisit a part of your practice that maybe needs some new energy. So I'm gonna leave the link for that down below. Good morning, friends. It is the next morning and it is so sunny this morning. It's supposed to be really, really, really warm today, and then it's supposed to thunderstorm, which it didn't do yesterday. Now, I know that weather reports are often blatantly wrong, but they can sometimes give you an idea of what's going on. And so as much as I am looking out there and desperately wanting to start planting out some of my seedlings because it is so nice, I'm also looking at the weather report and realizing that there's still going to be, just as like for every really warm day that is in the 10-day forecast, there's also going to be a cool day with a night that gets below freezing still. And that's just how it is here in late April. It is still, it's very different than late May. We'll say that. Late May is generally beyond our last frost date, but we're still not past it right now. So yeah, look at him enjoying that little sun patch. I'm trying to like get him to come out with me while I'm gardening. I got him to come out in the evening when things had kind of calmed down. But yeah, he hasn't been an indoor-outdoor cat his whole life like my old cats were, so he's a little bit finicky about going in and out. And speaking of, another thing we need to do is we need to build him a new cat door. Some of you guys might remember last year we had, just a plastic cat flap, but we had it installed into just some foam core to make this strip so that he could get in and out. And back when I had the girls, they used to use it all the time, but that started to fall apart. So I want to make one out of like maybe some plywood or something and actually paint it, make something legit this year. So my partner and I are going to be doing that at some point. But I did want to give you a little seedling update. Most things look similar to the way they did yesterday, but we just repotted these acorn squashes and stuff yesterday, and they're already just ready to party even more. So that's exciting. And I realized that I must have planted a lot of zucchinis because when I planted them in the compost, they didn't make it at all. And then at some point, I think I accidentally planted 2 more sets of them. So we're going to have a lot. But my sort of plan here, just so that I make sure I have enough plants, is I'm going to pot each thing out into their own containers so that I have just more plants than I need. And some of them will actually get planted out. Others of them might end up getting composted or given away if I can convince anyone else to grow some vegetables. But last year I found that sometimes it was really hard to actually have everything I wanted growing in my garden, because if something failed at any point in the journey, I didn't have new seedlings to back it up. So I'm going to try and stagger some things as well as just have some backup seedlings and see if that helps. But one thing I am considering doing outside is planting the potatoes, because potatoes grow really fast. I don't think you're really supposed to start them indoors. I think you're just supposed to chit them, which is where you put the potatoes on the windowsill and let them start to grow buds. I don't think you're actually supposed to put them in soil inside, but I got really excited and wanted to get started. And I'm pretty sure that potatoes don't mind the 34-degree nights that we're going to have a few more times in the next couple of weeks. So I'm going to look into that a little bit more, and we will possibly plant these out. And I think we're going to do it in the garden bed out there, because I think I need to dig that up, do some research on how to add compost back into that to freshen it up. And I'm going to try to avoid the areas where I planted garlic, but I think I'm going to pull out the onions that are out there, because I don't think that they're going to continue growing. So like these are the grocery store scallions or whatever. I have plenty of experience regrowing these, and generally you only get 3 harvests out of them. So like it'll be big and you cut it down, then it gets big again, you cut it down, and then on the 3rd time it kind of just stays like this. Its growth is like stunted, and you realize that it's kind of just out of energy, and then it's time to compost it. And that's kind of what the ones outside are looking like. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and compost those. We've got an abundance of these, and I'm going to kind of clear out the bed and start fresh, but I'm going to try to avoid where the garlic is and the broccoli, because I think those are the only things. I might even repot the broccoli somewhere else. We'll see. But I'm aching to get out in the garden because it is so nice this morning. And I am in a phase right now where I'm between like witchy morning routines. So I'm someone who does like to have a consistent morning routine, but I do change it up periodically. So if something starts to feel boring or mundane or just not exciting anymore or not really magical anymore, it's time for me to do something different. So the routine that I've been doing at my altar for the past few months actually has been really cool and like very witchy and whatever, but I'm just not feeling it anymore. So I think really soon I'm gonna redo the whole altar for this next side of spring season. And for right now though, my morning routine might just be gardening. And when I did have a larger yard, my morning routine was gardening. Like I might do a meditation in bed or, you know, some other thing for my mental and spiritual health, but just going outside barefoot and dealing with my whole garden every morning was so cathartic to me that I can't honestly think of anything that's more spiritual than that. And even though here it's a little bit different, I don't have as much to keep up with, and it isn't quite as tranquil of an environment, I can make it my morning routine during the seasons when it makes sense. And so right now I'm giving myself permission to step away from the altar and, you know, stop being a living room pagan, as they say, for the moment, and be an outside pagan. So let's get outside. Also, there's a couple of fun things that we can do today that have nothing to do with plants. Can I help you, Mowgli? Morning is my time to pet him, so I've got to pay my toll. I'm petting him with my foot right now. There are some fun things we can do that don't involve plants, one of which, now that we've got that mess cleaned up with the compost, is we can put down our carpet, our grass rug, as I like to call it, to kind of just make it a little bit more green and magical out there. And I'm also going to look online today for privacy fence options. So that north-facing side of the garden there, that doesn't need to be out in the open like that, because the sun comes from over there and kind of from over there. So I can put some kind of wall up right there, which will first of all just protect me from the annoyingness of children running around. I know some of you guys like children. I love children in the sense that I want the best for them, but I don't like being around them. They are loud and obnoxious and kind of rude. So and I just want peace and quiet, and I'm not apologetic about that. So I am relying heavily on my noise canceling headphones, and I'm going to put some kind of screen up there. Now, one reason why I definitely want to do that as soon as possible is because there are also new neighbors in the one right across here. And I'm pretty sure one of them catcalled me yesterday. So I ignored them completely, maybe they were just saying something in passing that had nothing to do with me, but I'm just not interested. I just want peace and quiet and privacy. So I'm going to find something to put there, and I'm going to show you what I'm considering, and I'm going to talk to my partner to see if he can kind of help me make it as nice looking and as adorable, I guess, as possible. Oh, okay. So I just realized these are not extra zucchinis. Somehow I was reading that wrong. This is actually a mini variety of pumpkin that I think I'm probably going to have a much better chance at actually getting fruit out of in this environment. So let's go ahead and give these guys their own rooms. All right, guys, so apparently my garlic did not make it. I found basically no trace of garlic bulbs in there except for one rotten garlic bulb. Maybe the other one's disintegrated, I have no idea. But the good news is that now the garden bed is free. So I'm gonna put potatoes on one side of it right now. And I'm also, before I do that though, I'm also going to put new compost in there. And I think I'm gonna do a quick Google search or something to just get an idea of how to do that. I don't know if I mix it all the way in or like put it on the bottom or like what I'm supposed to do, but we're gonna plant some potatoes and I'm very excited. Now, as you saw, those broccolis don't look the best, but I've nurtured them for over a year now, so I'm just gonna put them in a pot and take care of them and just see what happens. Who knows, maybe they'll bounce back. No attachment to the outcome on that because we do have some new broccoli growing, so yeah. I also found an Amazon listing for this like fake ivy mesh, and I found the perfect size where if I order 2 of them, I can just put 2 strips on that north-facing wall and no more annoying people. So, well, I mean, they'll still be there, but between my noise-canceling headphones and my privacy fence, we're gonna have a better year this year. Like, I don't know if you guys can relate to this or not. I'm an introvert and I also just am extremely selective about the kinds of people who are allowed to affect my energy. And it's been really challenging living in this apartment building in particular because it's just so crowded and I have no control over a lot of things. So I'm learning a lot about control and surrender and like accepting what you can't change and changing what you can't accept. Like that has been the whole theme, and it just seems to keep going. So yeah, let me know if you can relate to that, but that has been one of the biggest challenges that I've been facing. And this year, my resolution is to just not let things bother me and not let things hold me back from the creative and expressive person that I want to be, and the person that enjoys nature and the outdoors and having a garden and all of those things that seem to kind of be challenged in this environment. And that's going to mean relying heavily on internal tools as well as external tools. So I just asked my partner, because I'm kind of saving for my taxes right now. It's still tax time at the moment, and y'all entrepreneurs know what I'm talking about. But I just sent that listing to my partner, and he kindly said that he will order it for me. So I'm really excited for that. So that'll be something we'll get to put together in one of our next videos. So guys, again, upon further consideration, my partner seems to think that the reason why my seedlings died in my compost mixture is not just because seedlings can't handle compost, but also because you're supposed to like chemically test your compost to see if it's even inhabitable. So that kind of scared me a little bit, because I did definitely plant the potatoes before finding that out, among some other things. But fingers crossed, wish me luck. Tomorrow, actually the day after I am editing this, we are going to do some chemical tests on my compost and my potting mix and just use some science, because the thing with gardening is I want to think of it as an art, but it's actually a science, and I don't have a science brain. So this is kind of a challenge for me, but we live and we learn, right? You try things, you experiment, and you hopefully team up with people who can see your blind spots. So I will keep you guys posted. I did find 2 garlic bulbs out there that look like they might be alive and growing roots. So I'm gonna find a place to put those so they don't dry out. And then there's also something else I wanna show you. Don't mind the dishwasher, but these are some herb propagations over here. And this was a successful experiment, because I don't know if you can see that, but that right there is a root growing out of the bottom of some grocery store parsley. And I wasn't sure if parsley would actually root, because I know cilantro doesn't, it just rots when you put it in water, and I thought they were pretty similar since they're so like long and fluffy and stemmy, but apparently that will grow roots. This one right here, this grocery store lettuce, took forever to start growing roots because it was focusing on growing these little mini plants, but this one now has roots. I think I am gonna give that one a little bit more time though, to just develop a little bit more. But I also wanted to show you, this is some sage right here from the grocery store that has now started to root as well. So I might plant this one up because it's starting to kind of coil around in there. It's gonna need some room. But yeah, the kitchen garden is doing its job too. guys, are you ready for the big reveal? Here is how my seedlings are doing after learning all of the crucial lessons that we talked about in this video. Now, on the day that I am recording this voiceover is actually the 24th, and they're even bigger. Like, I'm looking at them right now, and it's really impressive, and I'm really tempted to bust out the camera and film one more scene for you guys, but at this point this video is so long, and if you want to see what happens next, I invite you to stay tuned, hit the subscribe button and the bell button so that you know the next time that I upload. And in the meantime, I invite you to also check out these videos from last year that'll show you how I got started gardening in this particular environment, how I built my raised bed, and pretty much how we got to this point if you're curious. And of course, it comes along with a lot of really powerful witchy tips and tricks that you can use to harness the energy of the seasons for whatever it is that your goals are for this year. And the videos from last year consisted of both personal sharing as well as sharing with you guys my favorite journal prompts for each of the seasons on the Witch's calendar. So if you're looking to harness that plant, tend, harvest, compost cycle, both in your garden and in any other area of your life, I highly recommend going back and checking out those videos. Thank you so much for being your magical self, for staying tuned to the end of this video, and I will see you in the next one. Blessed be.